Perry Sound has sound. Wow, so we have Perry Sound on the line. That's great.
Awesome.
Far away from here.
I love this map.
Yeah. Okay, so it sounds like, oh, look at that.
Whoa.
Thing that Rod's doing. All right, we're getting ready to start, everybody. Oh.
No sound at Tecumseh.
Yeah. So just like we did last Tuesday, a little bit different questions. So after the first session, how has your physical literacy understanding changed? So if you could use that view options button at the top and then press annotate and then choose something that would allow you to mark either in the pink where you feel about the same, or you have a little bit more understanding in the yellow, or you get it and you're in the green.
This looks positive.
You had an influence, Dawn, so that's great. McNaughton's shouting out, so we have to mention them just because these three ladies, my panel beside me, is all from McNaughton. So good morning, McNaughton. Nice to hear from you. Ruth and Melissa joining Megan and Robin this morning. Good morning.
Yay.
Yeah.
I talked you up all the way to work, Dawn.
Oh, thank you.
No, we got our folks from Zone, Arrow Road.
Well, look at that response, because we did have some in the pink zone on Tuesday morning, so that's awesome.
Walpole Island, welcome Walpole Island. We're happy you're here with us. It's wonderful.
Good morning, Paul and Aaron. Oh, Paul and Aaron.
Paul and Aaron next door as well. Good morning, Paul and Aaron. We got all our McNaughton folks, McNaughton staff. So the ECE staff and the kindergarten staff there is the largest in the entire district.
Wow.
So yeah, we have, are you at 7 still classrooms? Yeah, so 7 kindergarten classes. When I was there, oh, I don't know how many years ago, but when full day kindergarten came, as we were the last year of 2014, it would have been. So 2014, when it went to all schools, then the French immersion schools got it, and that was McNaughton. And we had, I remember telling people at principals meetings that I have 180 kindergarten children in my building, and we have many buildings in our district that don't have 180 kids total. So having 108, it's just mind-boggling when you think about 103 and 4 and 5-year-olds. So that is the reality over at McNaps. So
it changes the whole environment, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting for sure. And when I released the kindergarten crew to do some PD work, and I had 14 of them, right? Because there were 7 teachers and 7 ECEs. Even that, I was like, okay, so this is bigger than my whole staff was at Dawne Euphemia, where Tracy actually was an EA with me at Dawne Euphemia. So she was well aware that I was like, this is just my kindergarten staff, and it's bigger than my whole staff was at a previous school that I was at. So anyway, just to put things into perspective for people and why we're shouting out over there at McNaps. It's a different kind of animal over there because of the size. So just back to that last screen. Sorry, Rod, I didn't do what I needed to do yet because I was yakking. Okay, so this training is partially provided in partnership with the LKDSB and the Move and Play CK project, which is funded through the Ontario Trillium Foundation GROW grant. Partners of the Move and Play CK project include Lambton Kent District School Board, St. Clair District School Board, the Municipality of Chatham-Kent, YMCA of Southwestern Ontario, and Sport for Life. Okay, thanks, Rod. And before we begin, we will do our local territorial acknowledgement, which we do before all of our sessions. We acknowledge that the land on which we are gathered is part of the traditional territory of the Chippewa, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Delaware nations. Thank you.
Cool.
Yep. Now it's time for Dawn to share. There she is.
Whoa, there we go. And then I need to share. We'll share my computer soon. There we go. And hopefully we can get it to move up. There we go. We're all set. Everybody's seeing my screen and it's a full screen?
We are, yep.
Excellent. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for your interest and enthusiasm on Tuesday morning. You gave me lots to think about since we said goodbye on Tuesday morning. And so what I thought I would do today, we left at the end of the day on Tuesday with a whole bunch of comments on the chat line around safety and liability outside. So I wanted to talk a little bit, just sort of wrap that piece up because we had so many questions about that. And just finish with a little bit more around that. Then we're going to move into indoor environments, and I'll talk about why that is becoming increasingly important in the work that we're doing, the early years physical literacy team, in focusing a bit on the indoor environment. And then I want to talk to you, just to finish this up, with some of the benefits that we're finding as part of the 2-year proof of concept study that I'll talk about just very, very briefly. I don't want to talk about the study, but I do want to talk about some of the benefits that we're finding for both children and the educators in the classroom. So just to remind everybody, there's the 2 terms, physical activity, which we all understand to be the movement, and we understand how that increases our heart rate and our breathing and perhaps raises a light sweat. Physical literacy, as Mary Lynn mentioned on Tuesday, is a different concept. And so just to help you think about that again, physical literacy provides the tools that allows us to be physically active. So just as in when you're with literacy, that we're the common use of the term, reading and writing and communication, literacy provides us the tools, the understanding of letters, decoding words, understanding how to read on a page, and that allows us to become passionate readers. Numeracy, the tools there are numbers, and as we get older, formulas, adding, subtracting, multiplying, and then moving into sines and cosines, etc., that allow us to crack the world of math and to look at the incredible wonders in a mathematical world. So physical literacy provides us with the tools to be physically active, which is an important component of a healthy lifestyle. So the definition physical literacy, and this is a very basic definition, it's become more complex over the time, but the very first definition in 2010 was that physical literacy will encourage us to be motivated to move. If we want to move, and the more we move, the more confident we become. We learn that we can, in fact, leap over that creek. We can, in fact, figure out how to put our hands and feet on the climber or on a tree to climb. And so as we become more confident in how our body works and moves, we become more competent. We know then that we're able to do a whole bunch of activities and sports and leisure opportunities because we have the skills to do them. And that competence then encourages us to be more motivated to move. And so the cycle just keeps going. And the idea being that the focus on this in the early years is when the brain is developing. 90% of our brain is developed by the age of 5. And if built into that developing brain is this motivation, confidence, and competence to move, then we've got a good start on a healthy lifestyle. So what are the tools of fundamental movement skills? And again, on Tuesday, I talked about stability and balance. And for some reason, when I read a lot about physical literacy in the FMS, stability and balance is often not even included. People talk about running, jumping, leaping, hitting, kicking, catching. But without balance, we can't do any of those things. And so for me, balance is one of the first things that we begin to work on as an infant, and we must maintain our balance skills throughout life if we're going to continue to be able to be physically literate and physically active. Locomotion is the second one. This is where we do our running and jumping and leaping and hopping. And in all the work that we've done, we find that locomotion is the one that children seem to develop most naturally, because regardless of whether they've got equipment or materials or opportunity, as long as they can run and jump, they will. Manipulation and coordination is when we add on that final third piece, the balls that we catch and kick and throw, and then our hand-eye coordination or our feet-eye coordination as we add in things like hockey sticks and baseball bats and rackets. So just a quick return to what the definitions are. So here was the question that I wanted to come back to, because there were a lot of comments that Ben was reading from the chat about the concern of safety and liability. So is going outside too risky? And I love this photo. This is from one of our study centers in Revelstoke. I showed you their playground on Tuesday. And here the children are allowed and encouraged to climb the fence. And none of them have climbed to the top. None of them have climbed over the top. And none of them have fallen off the top. Because one of the joys of this kind of play is that children will only climb as high as they feel comfortable. And that's where the confidence comes in, and then eventually the competence. So there might come a day when the children will reach all the way to the top, and then there'll have to be some boundaries put on by the educators in the program, say, no, you can't climb over the top and down the other side. But I wanted to put a couple of quotes. I've got 3 quotes here that I think really encourage us to think about outside play and the kinds of things we do. So we talked on Tuesday about how 1/3 of Canadian preschool children under the age of 5 are either overweight or obese. And we talked about that as potentially being a safety issue. We want to keep them safe inside. We limit them to our backyards, perhaps, or only the playground when we're able to go with them. And we filled the screen with how we used to play as children, and we know that that's changed. So it seems like it's a catch-22. Our desire to see that no harm comes to our kids is, in fact, causing harm to our kids. So by trying to keep them safe, we're actually causing them harm through obesity and overweight. I really liked these next 2 quotes. When we think about risks and we think about what we need to be doing is keeping our children as safe as necessary. So we want to remove the hazards. We want to ensure that, there aren't broken glass and needles in the playground or in the area where we're walking. We want to make sure that they understand that swift flowing water or deep water is dangerous. So we want to keep them as safe as necessary. But if we keep them as safe as possible, that's when we move into the bubble wrap scenario. That's the challenging situation that then begins to cause harm to our children. So Brandy Tannenbaum from Sunnybrook's Children's Hospital, her little catchphrase is, we must eliminate the hazards, remove the glass and the needles, but just manage the risks. And so Child Nature Alliance Canada has now come up with a fantastic tool on their website, which allows you to look at the benefits and the risks. And actually take a look at, is this worth us going into this area or doing this outside trip? Are we balancing the benefits and the risks so that the benefits far outweigh the risks? I talked about this quickly on Tuesday morning about the process that we've developed. So I just wanted to put it up here so that you could actually see it. This is a process that we've been using in Alberta and BC to work with supervisors, directors, principals, licensing officers, school boards, and parents to show that when we want to take children outside, when we want to engage them in active outdoor or risky play, and by the way, we can't use the term risky play in Alberta. Alberta Health Services gets very upset if we refer to anything that's risky, because play is inherently risky. Why would we want to add more risk to something that's already inherently risky? So we use the term active outdoor play. So here are the 4 steps that we found work really well. First of all, create your center or your program philosophy. Why is it important? What does this play offer to children? And we talked on Tuesday about resilience, about building confidence and competence, social skills, being able to emotionally regulate. So this play has all kinds of benefits. It's important. And then we need to understand what our regulations say. And we're certainly finding everywhere I've been, and I don't think Ontario is any different, is that school board regulations are often very different from childcare regulations in terms of what's allowed, what can be in a playground, what type of play, and so on. And that's an interesting contrast or contradiction for SKJK programs or for childcare centers that are located in school buildings. That becomes something that's an interesting piece. How are you going to measure the success of what you're doing? And now that we've got this risk-benefit analysis from the Child Nature Alliance, we can do that with a proven tool to do that. What are your goals? And how are you going to do it? What are the strategies? So once you've created this program philosophy, then you educate. You educate all your staff so that all your staff, regardless of who comes to them, can say, I'm doing this type of play because here are what the children in my room need, and here's how I'm meeting their needs. So when the staff are appropriately able to program and explain how the programming relates to philosophy, then we're finding that everybody's just supporting parents, supervisors, licensing officers, whoever. But then from that comes that all staff provide active, engaged supervision. So they are a part of the programming. It's not turning the children out into this place and allowing them to run free and create chaos. It's something that's intentional and well supported by the staff. And licensing officers have told us that if they come into a childcare center, and I know we're talking JKSK here, but with licensing officers, if they come into a program and staff can talk about what they're doing, they see the staff actively engaged, they're fine with it. But if they come into a program and something's missing, then they'll close that play down, and rightly so. Then you communicate to everybody who comes into your program. Everybody who's in your building, everybody who's affected by the kind of play you do. And that really includes parents and families. So why are we doing this? What are the children learning by being outside for the whole first block? And then everybody's engaged and everybody supports. So we found this process, we've been trying it out now in a number of areas across Canada, and it seems to be successful. So it's a process that we're comfortable sharing in how we engage everybody in our outdoor learning. So here's where I'm going to ask you if you're willing to share some of your stories, because Mary Lynn was telling me that many of you will take your children out for extended lengths of time. The way your school day is technically structured with its 2 nutrition breaks of 20 minutes to eat and 20 minutes outside provides 3 separate blocks of time. And so I'm going to open it up, first of all, to our panel to talk a little bit, because all of them are taking extended time outside. And I'm going to ask them to talk about why they do that and what the benefits are and what they do when they're outside. What do they do with that time? And then if some of you are willing to click on your mic and tell us a story, I'd love to hear them. So let's start with our panel at Acknowledgement, please.
Who wants to begin? I was remiss and did not introduce them this morning either, so I'll do that now. So we have Tracy Clark. Hi. She's waving, and we have Scarlett Orr.
Hello.
And Jocelyn Riom.
Hi.
And I'm so glad they're here.
Yes. Yeah, and they all are ECEs over at McNaughton School, which is attached, I say over at because it's attached to the Chatham Board office, which is where we are sitting right now. And I don't know, who wants to begin to talk about the outdoor? You've been doing it for a long time, so how did it start and why? Tracy?
The how? The how I don't actually remember because I think we've done it since we started at McNaughton. We start our mornings outside.
Well, even daycare regulations, you should be out an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon. So some of that might.
So we do
prior
9:15
regulations
to about 10 usually, but it depends on activities and what goes out.
Yeah.
We take things out of our shed from the ice cream buckets and drums, the bikes. There's snow, so sometimes there's a sled, there's shovels, there's snow building things, pots and pans and metal ladles and spoons and all of the things that they dig in our pond at McNaughton.
Can you explain your pond, please? I've seen it, but many others probably haven't.
You go over it. Yeah, you go around. Yeah, they go through it.
Basically, our grass area, we have a few low spots, so we get quite the water collect up, and the children love to run and splash and jump and pour and dump and slide and belly flop. No.
Oh.
They definitely get pretty muddy, though. Our yard can be quite mucky, and it's been good, though. We
manage it.
Yeah.
I can speak to having different partners. So my partner now that I have came from grade 1. So, that's a different structure. And we started out with her normal structure, and we convinced her that we should spend an hour outside, and she couldn't believe the difference. So I feel like seeing the way it used to be and the way it is now it can attest to how good it is for the children, because she always says, what do you do with kids that are bouncing off the walls? You take the walls away, because you have those. It's not always boys, it's usually boys for some reason, that are just so busy, and that either it's the fresh air or the no walls, but they are ready to sit down and get to it when they come in. So
So that's the difference.
That's
that
difference.
She's noticed. So
Yes.
since you've been doing that. Okay.
Yeah, and if we can't get out in the morning, we get out in the afternoon, and we just love it. There's so many things. We end up using our running long jump pit in the back, and the kids are measuring how far they jumped. They lined up a whole bunch of twigs along the edge, and who can jump how far. We have a path in the back.
Measurements.
What's that?
Non-standard
measurements.
Right in the curriculum, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
They're measuring, they're taking turns, I take some for a big walk. They just want to walk through the trees. They pick up garbage. They climb the trees. They dig in the sand pits.
Yeah, we have a wonderful tree line, and you can really trust them back there too. I know we're not talking about fences here, but there is a fence on the other side of the tree line, so it's nice because we can go into that bigger yard, and they have a bit more free will because we can let them, knowing they're not going to exit the yard, but go around the perimeter in behind the trees, and they'll run. And we have a park on the other side too that we can sometimes go to that has a really wonderful climbing tree.
And the pond that they were talking about has been, as most in Southwestern Ontario will be able to attest to, we have had a very mild winter so far. And so therefore our yards with our youngest in it are very muddy. And if you have low spots like McNaughton does, then you also have water that has just accumulated with the rain and the snow.
I think a lot of them have learned, though, don't dive in it.
Yeah.
It's a long way. I feel like they'll say, Madame, look at me. I am like a little bit muddy, but I didn't get out of control. So parents have learned to send wearing boots and splash pants, and we've got it.
It's great. Some of them have 2 pairs of snow pants, 2 pairs of boots, lots of extra gear. So it's excellent, actually. So parents are dressing them in the morning, and they know that they're out first things. So that's been perfect to make sure that they're all dressed appropriately, so we're able to spend extra time.
You have covered so much. So let's think about this. You've talked about locomotion. You've talked about manipulation with things like sleds and buckets and all of your snow playing equipment. You've talked about balance. You've talked about the things that you can take from indoors out. So you've talked about non-standard measurement, which is part of your math curriculum. You've talked about some science in terms of getting out into the trees and potentially looking at the things that the seasons provide in the trees. You've talked about communication with parents, how the parents have decided they're going to provide the gear and make sure that the children are ready for this experience. And you've talked about how your current teacher has completely changed her mind about the importance of being outside. That's a fabulous, inclusive story. Anything else that you can think of? Do you do art outside? Do you do any reading or literacy outside? Storytelling?
Oh
I
yeah.
feel like the books and the chalkboards come out when it's a bit nicer.
When it's a bit nicer, we do a bit of painting up on the bricks, and we bring paper out, and we do books under the tree.
They were painting in the
and-
snow.
Yeah,
They?
yeah, they were.
Yeah.
The climbing on the snow hills is one thing in itself too.
Exactly.
Balance and
Yeah.
locomotion that would, be
They were
happening.
digging tunnels, and oh yeah.
And think about the life skills that teaches. Because you, maybe not this winter, but like us out in the West, winter is a time of ice and lots of snow. And if we learn how to balance and walk safely on the ice without falling, if we learn how to climb over piles of snow, we're developing life skills that are going to keep us safer throughout our winter and not having to make all those trips to emergency rooms. What about injuries for your children? Do you find that your children are getting hurt with all this time and play outside?
No, but it's funny. I remember after your session before speaking with one of my friends that's an emerge nurse, and she said it's always adults, it's never kids that come in with head injuries that have slipped on the ice.
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting.
The other, so I can speak to when I was principal there. So the biggest injury I'd ever encountered as a principal happened at McNaughton, and it was because he fell off of play equipment. So the old style equipment.
Yeah.
It was not because of the kind of play that these guys are doing. It was actually a piece of equipment, and he fell and broke his arm in 2 places. So, so that's interesting too, right?
It is. And I mentioned at the end of Tuesday's webinar about the No Rules School video in New Zealand, and how the principal is saying the injuries have simply disappeared because the children are managing their own risks. They know what their barriers are, what their boundaries are, and they may start pushing them, but not to the point generally of injury. Did we have that? That was a great discussion. Thank you for that. Do we have anybody, Mary Lynn, who looks like they want to come in and share a story?
We have, nobody is offering to share a story. Is anybody out there that would like to unmute themselves and share about their outdoor time? The mute button is down in my screen, down in the left-hand corner at the bottom. We have had a couple of people add to the chat room. So our kiddos like to do, I don't know if I'm going to be able to read that right because it might be like a French thing, en plein air paintings, unplanned air painting.
Okay.
Sorry, Bright Scroll, but I'm not sure what that means. And I mean, I understand the last part. I don't understand that ENPLEIN. From Indian Creek, I think it's also important to keep in mind that we are not limited to the confines of our fenced-in playgrounds. It's important to go beyond the fence and explore bigger green spaces. A walk to the creek opens up a lot of nature discussion and discovery. So that's dependent upon where you're at, right? Because the school has a beautiful creek that's not too far away that they can walk to.
That's wonderful. And that they know and feel comfortable taking the children off the school grounds to that creek. That's incredible.
Yeah. And
well, thank you. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Forest schools are a great resource and an opportunity to learn. And we did have one that say they're limited to their yard. So
Oh, okay.
that's, yeah. So, you know, there are limits because of permission and that kind of thing. Just depends.
Right, right. And so that's something, goals and thoughts, but thank you, panel. That was awesome. You just covered everything I was hoping you would. Thank you. So we'll move on here. And I just wanted to say really quickly about this study, because the information that I'm going to provide now I did not provide when I was with you in November, because we're starting to analyze some of the data from our study. So I thought I'd just take this one slide and talk really quickly. We've been funded, our early years physical literacy team, to do a 2-year study that's divided into 2 phases. Phase 1 was the first year, phase 2 this year. We are working with 30 childcare centers in Alberta and BC. And so I'm sure everybody in Ontario realizes that you're the leader, if you will, in having the full day SK or JK-SK program. And so in most other provinces, children are still in childcare until they're 5. We divided this into study and control centers so we really could determine whether the program was making a difference and it wasn't just natural development. Particularly when you're working with young children, they develop so quickly. We needed the control centers who would just not do anything different than their normal standard of practice, but do the pre and post data with us so that we could compare the difference between the study and the control centers. Our objectives were to see if we could provide evidence of benefits to children, to young children, from enhanced physical literacy opportunities. Interestingly, there's lots of research about how important this is for elementary school children, for older children, for adults. There's a dearth of information about the importance of it for children under the age of 5. It's just a hard population to study because they're not in school. And so, you know, it's easy to study children in school because all children are there, or most children. But for preschool children, it's a little bit more challenging. So we're really cutting new ground here by trying to provide evidence of the benefits that we believe are there for children. And we wanted to determine how we could support the educators to develop their own motivation, confidence, and competence to provide more physical literacy in their programming and to increase the amount of physical activity. I'll add a little piece in here because one of you raised it, that in Ontario childcare regulations, children are to be outside for 2 hours a day. In BC regulations, children are to be outside for 1 hour a day. And I'm really embarrassed to say this. In Alberta, we have regulations that require we have a playground in childcare centers, but there are no regulations to say that you actually need to go outside and use that playground. So we do have childcare centers in Alberta where children don't go outside from day to day to day. I don't know why they wouldn't do that, because as one of you mentioned, the change in the children after being outside for an hour makes such a difference. I can't understand why people wouldn't take children outside. And then we want to explore the potential policy implications. So where has that led us? Well, it's led us to looking more closely at what do we do in the indoor environment with physical literacy. So we're really riding a wave of momentum with outdoor play. So somebody in one of the chat comments talked about forest preschools and what we're learning about nature-based play through these forest preschools. They're starting to spread a little bit across Canada. They're huge in Europe, in England, in the Scandinavian countries, where their weather is way worse than ours. And children are spending full days outside in nature. And there is some preliminary research that suggests that for children with ADHD, 20 minutes spent outside in a natural area is the equivalent to a daily dose of Ritalin. So that's what your teacher was finding, your teaching partner. When you took the children outside for an hour, they were better able to focus. They were better able to focus when they came into the classroom, better able to do the work that was intended for them, better able to enjoy the activities. We also know that loose parts is just a huge movement now across everywhere. And in Canada, it's accepted now that loose parts should be part of an outdoor playground, whether in childcare or in elementary school. More and more the loose parts are coming into playgrounds, and we're learning how to manage them, how to keep the playgrounds tidier, how to ensure that they're not used as weapons, etc. What are the rules around using loose parts? And we're becoming more competent with that. But I'm not going to be able to show you any videos today because the idea of the indoor environment is one that has not yet really begun to be explored. So we're going to talk a little bit today, and this really came to the fore for us in our first phase of the study last year. Alberta had a polar vortex settle in, and we had temperatures that did not go above -30 for 6 weeks, from the beginning of February to the middle of March. And so I was just talking before we all got going about what did this mean to these children who literally have cabin fever, who can't get outside for 5 to 6 weeks because it's so cold. What does this feel like for them? And so we began to look at what can we do in the indoor environment. Not everybody has access to indoor spaces, or if they do, when it's that cold for 6 weeks, everybody wants access to the indoor spaces and gym time is limited. So what do we do within the indoor environment? So that's where I want to talk a bit for the rest of today. So I introduced the Apple model. I just want to go over it quickly with you today, and then we're going to look at your own 4 frames of learning. But as I mentioned on Tuesday, the Apple model was developed looking at brain development and child development. And so we started with relationships because we know that relationships, peer-to-peer, peer-to-adult, are crucial for healthy development. Children need to have relationships, serve and return kinds of interactions, feeling safe and feeling trust with others. So relationships is sort of the starting place. Then we move into looking at the environment as the third teacher. So we've talked a lot about what can be outside in the playground. What does a natural playground look like? What would loose parts look like outside? Now let's think about what the environment inside would look like. What would we have in that environment that would provide children opportunity, exposure, and elicit their curiosity to move? What does play look like in the indoor environment? How do we provide play in an indoor environment that encourages exploration, that allows children to practice over and over again until they've mastered, that is truly joyful play? How do we provide that in a physical activity context within an indoor environment? What does the engagement of the educators in the room look like? How do they model? How do they participate in that physical activity? How do they provide the supervision that isn't a hovering kind of supervision, but is a supportive learning kind of supervision? And then just like the core of the apple that increases as motivation, confidence, and competence begins to develop, the skin of the apple allows for more relationships to be built, a better environment to be developed, more active play, more engagement, and it just keeps going. So the core here, the initial idea, was that we would be looking at children's motivation, confidence, and competence. And as you noticed in the objectives of the study, we've started to understand how important it is that the educators in the room feel motivated, confident, and competent to provide this. And this has been a difficult piece for us because particularly in Alberta, and I would imagine in areas like Toronto, which are extremely diverse, over 60% of our ECEs are newcomers to Canada. So they may have come from a culture or a background where women weren't supposed to be active, where in fact it was openly discouraged that they run, jump, play outside. That was not part of their role as women. And so now we're asking them to think about doing these things. And so the idea of saying, well, you know, this, you need to provide balls and you need to teach children how to throw and catch these balls when they themselves don't know how to do that, when perhaps they've never kicked a ball. We needed to back away from saying, that's not what we're doing. This is not a recreation program. You are not in a phys ed class. You're providing the environment, the opportunity to play, you're engaging with them, and you're building relationships. So looking at that, and then if we look at your own kindergarten program, and I want you to start seeing if you can make some connections between what we just talked about in the Apple model and your 4 frames of learning. And in a minute, I'm going to ask you how physical literacy contributes to each of these 4 frames of learning. So as we go through, think about that. So belonging and contributing, that's relationships. How does being physically literate and having opportunities to be physically active allow children to feel a sense of belonging in your program and of contributing to that program? This one is huge, self-regulation and well-being. How can being physically literate, allowing you to be more physically active, help you regulate your emotions and feel better? And I think that one's pretty obvious. How can we demonstrate literacy and math behavior through active games and being physically literate? And we just had an example of non-standardized measurement outside. And then think back to that loose parts video and that we watched on Tuesday, and the idea of problem solving and innovating. How can being physically literate and being more physically active help us learn to problem solve and to be innovators? And that last one is going to be where our children are going to find their careers as they graduate from school, because the non-typical careers are not as common anymore. They're not going to be able to just walk into a manufacturing job in Ontario or an oil and gas job in Alberta. They're going to have to become innovators and problem solvers in our new economy. So thinking of those 4, I want you to use your annotate button, which is up at the top. And just as we did with the map, can you fill in where you think physical literacy and physical activity, what kinds of things would help you meet each of these 4 frames of learning that are part of your kindergarten curriculum document? So reach for the annotation button, look for the text, and type in some text for us about how physical literacy leading to more physical activity would help demonstrate literacy in math or help problem solving and innovation. Is everybody comfortable with what I'm asking you to do? Sharing materials, creating rules of play, that's huge. Organizing friendships, huge one. Counting things, yes. Risk-taking and trying to solve new problems, excellent. Oh, I can't see that one that's underneath my side screen. Can anybody read what was just typed in self-regulation and well-being?
It says working on skills.
Thank you. It's underneath my side little panel. Creating rules and working together, teamwork, yes, yes. Building their names with loose parts, oh yes. It's that large, it's written over top of the other print under demonstrating literacy. Emotional control, body movement, helping others, noise levels is huge. Yes, negotiating. Now you've got it. Now you're seeing where they all fit together. Absolutely.
I'll just let you know, Dawn, you can move your the video away? Like if
Yes.
you grab the top of it, you can move it around to a different part of the screen if you like. There's a
Oh,
little black
perfect. I can
panel.
get rid of it.
Yeah.
I can get rid of it. There we go. Thank you, Rod. Focus, yes. And that is actually a benefit. Focus is in the yellow type under problem solving. We're really finding that. Putting things away, yes. Classes, taking quiet time. Oh my goodness, yes. Perfect. I think, counting found objects, counting, etc. All of those things are really important. That's beautiful. Whoops. So I didn't mean to do that. So I think when you think of your 4 frames of learning and you think of physical activity and physical literacy, they fit together. It's another tool for you to meet and address the 4 frames of learning. And looking at the type that's in each of these boxes, it's not a stretch. It's pretty simple. It's pretty simple. So, Rod, if you wouldn't mind clearing that screen, and then I'll move to my next slide. Thank you. So here's where I'd like us to think a little bit more about the indoor environment. So think about your own classrooms. And we talk a lot about having a literacy-rich room. We make sure that we have books in our science center. In the housekeeping center, we'll have paper and pencils so that children can be writing shopping lists. We might have a book in the block center because we've been looking at construction perhaps. And so a book of buildings or a book of construction equipment. But we might plaster environmental print around the room, especially with our youngest children, so that we label tables and chairs and sink and door, so that children are seeing print everywhere they look. We spend time reading books, making books, printing books, telling stories, singing songs. So literacy is an embedded concept within our indoor environments. As is, in most cases, numeracy. We make sure that there's numbers printed up on the wall. We have things to count, things to sequence, things to sort. Those are generally a rich part of our indoor environment. So then how do we bring that same kind of thoughtfulness to creating a physically literate environment? So first of all, let's think about what does the classroom look like? What does the space look like? The amount and the layout of equipment and furniture that will provide room to move and be active. So this was another of the questions that we talked with the panel about this morning. So maybe you could just jump in and talk a little bit about, one of you said your classroom is quite minimalist. There's not a lot in there. What's happening within your own classrooms in terms of space? Wow.
Okay. So I was having technology issues, so we are now not muted. We were, and I was struggling getting out of the mute. So can you repeat the question, Dawn, just to make sure?
The question, the panel and I discussed this a little bit before we started this morning about your own indoor spaces, and one of you talked about being a minimalist. And so, can you just talk about?
Sure. Our indoor space is quite open, so they have free range bits. We try and keep everything fairly organized so that they have room to play and room to move things around and take things down. In terms of physically literate, we do have some improving to do and some things to add. Something that our children do love to do is take our big blocks, and they often use them as balance beams or means to jump from one to the other.
Yes, ours do that too.
And actually, Trace made something really cool in her room with.
Well, we've done 3 different activities with tape on the floor, and the first one I just took red, blue,
Painter's tape. No.
electrical tape actually.
Okay.
And the first one was one of the colors they could put their hands on, and the other one was their feet. I manipulated those across the room. And then I taped a hopscotch to the floor. And sometimes we use numbers, sometimes they use letters, sometimes they just hopped around like 4-year-olds because that's what they do.
Yes.
And then we removed that one, and I taped numbers to the floor from 1 to 20, and just watching them manipulate and move and physically move from one. I know it's not the same thing, but it's the one-to-one counting thing, and it's easier for them to do with their whole body than to point to each object.
Oh, I think that's fantastic. Yes. And tape is so easy because if you move your furniture around so you have some open floor, the painter's tape or colored electrician's tape that is available, and it just comes off the floor and it doesn't leave a mess behind, and it's durable and it's not slippery and it's not a tripping hazard, is just so easy. Yes, yes.
Don't use masking tape. I'm just going to say that. Really, do not use masking tape.
Because?
Doesn't come off in the end.
No, it doesn't come off in the end. No, it makes a mess.
Yeah.
And then you're trying to peel it off. But that's where the electrician's tape or the painter's tape definitely has. Yes.
Yesterday we did partner yoga. We were all so
You were sweating.
Oh yeah. Well, Ashley and I tried to get down on the floor and do it, and let me tell you, the kids were better at it. So they had their feet up in the air and holding hands. I just thought, let's try it, because we do yoga poses all the time, or stretches, or maybe not supposed to say yoga, but anyway, yeah. They do it all the time. So I thought, let's mix it up and do some partner, and they just had a great time. Oh, it wasn't quiet. It was loud, and everybody was having a great time. So that was our
The what? I was just reading somebody's playing minis.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So we've just had somebody in the chat says her microphone doesn't work, but they play mini sticks in the hallway with refs, scorekeepers, and timers.
That's awesome.
Oh, that's so awesome. That's so awesome.
Sharing that.
And the hallways are a great extra space. It means everybody needs to close the doors when you're out there. That's okay. It's a great extra space, and also provides a lot of opportunity for movement. And I think in McNaughton, you're lucky because there's a group of kindergarten classes just down that one hallway, so you're not disturbing anybody else other than your other kindergarten classrooms, right?
Very, very true.
Yeah. So the hallways is a great place. So thinking about the classroom and the materials and equipment. So I've got a photo up there that I wanted to share with you. And you'll see that she's created a large bench out of just a big piece of lumber and some huge blocks. And so initially, she put it in there as sort of a balance beam for children to walk on and jump off and that sort of thing. And because it took up a lot of space, she also used it as where the children sit during circle time. She uses it as a place for them to do art. She puts out a lot of their small motor activities on there. The puzzles go on there. They'll build Lego on there. So it becomes a multi-purpose piece of equipment that's important. And then you'll also notice that she's got a sandbox. So this was a sandbox that she had ordered in the spring. It was outside. She couldn't bear to see the snow fall on it. So she put a tarp underneath it, brought it inside, and thought it'll last for September, and then they'll be tired of it. It's big enough for 4 children at a time to sit inside. So same idea as your counting spots. Instead of one-to-one coordination, just using your finger to count, using your entire body to count, she's found that the children will use the sand table or the sand pit more than the old sand table because it's a whole body experience. It's a sensory experience through the whole body. She spreads that tarp out that you can see rolled up, and the children have learned they don't go in with their socks and shoes on. They shake themselves off inside before they come out. And she said after the first week or so, she didn't get any complaints from caretaking staff about sand everywhere. The children have learned how to use it properly if they want to keep it inside. And so it's now February and the sandbox is still inside. So there's different things to think about. So as materials and equipment there, repurposing what is available, benches become balance beams. We've had some people tell us about taking chairs out of their room because young children don't sit in chairs anyway, a lot of them. They'll stand beside them with one knee on them, or they're on their knees on the chair, or they're bouncing around the chairs. And, you know, it's always sit on the chair, sit on your bottom on the chair, take them away. If they're not going to sit on the chair, take them away. Instead, put in those little balance balls. You can get some that are small enough for children. Fabulous core strength exercise, keeps their body focused while they're sitting and doing something else. We've also used wobble boards, putting them at various locations throughout the room. Again, something different than just sitting on a chair. And so you talked about simple movement paths, so the tape on the floor. I love the idea, and that's what I've got here for the twister spots. So you talked about the red tape being feet and the blue tape being hands or something. These twister spots, one of our study participants created the polyethylene spots or whatever that stick to the floor, and she might put the outline of a left foot and a right hand on one of them. And so that's how the child stands on that one. And then the next one might just be a right foot, or she might have the right foot on the left-hand side of the spot and the left hand on the other side of the spot. And they have to figure out how are they going to stand and manipulate. So some of you may have remembered playing Twister when you were younger. You talked about putting a hopscotch place in there. So simple movement paths, such as these, bringing the outside equipment, the loose parts in from the playground that they're not going to be able to use during the winter inside, such as the sandbox and the balance beams. And how are they active? And so there are 3 ways that children can be active inside your classroom. And we just had that example of yoga, partner yoga. I think dancing is probably one of the most beautiful ways to get children to move full body. And so simple, simply putting on some music and dancing. And it may be just a hip hop dance or a jazzy type of dance or a free dance, whatever it is. It's just permission to get up and wiggle and jump and move and spin, as we talked about on Tuesday, requiring no planning. Simon Says I've added in here because it's a game that we always used to play. I don't see it as often anymore, and it's actually one of the ones that's being identified as an excellent one to help children develop inhibitory controls, to not be so impulsive. Because if you remember with Simon Says, touch your head, Simon Says, touch your nose, touch your shoulders. I didn't say Simon Says, so I can't touch my shoulders. So children have to listen, control their impulses, their automatic reaction to touch their shoulders, because that's what they heard. And that appears to be a game that's so simple, but helps children develop this inhibitory control that we're often missing in a lot of children. Drumming, any kind of music, any opportunities there, and transition. So full group activities that can just be, okay, we're switching activities, or we're getting a little loud and rowdy, let's just do something. And it can be as easy as that partner yoga, and so much fun. I just got a little video from my granddaughter over in England, and they're dancing. And of course, my granddaughters, you mentioned it's usually boys who have trouble with energy level. It's my granddaughter. And so loud voice in the middle of the game, this is so much fun. And she's just full body on it. But she needs to expend that energy if she's going to be able to focus. And sometimes it's a way either to help children with lots of energy focus. It's also children who maybe are a little bit quiet, maybe they get too much screen time at home, maybe they're already becoming couch potatoes, and you have to energize some of your children in your room. You may have some of those as well, or children who are experiencing stress, and so their whole movement level has gone down. Something like these activities not only reduces the energy level for those who are hyperactive, but increases the energy level for those who maybe are a little too sedentary, a little too slow. Small group activities, creating a corner in your room where you might have things like balance beams, mats, tunnels, balls, bean bags, things that you can put in the corner. And so when it's time for children to have free play, those who need the more physical activity move over to the activity corner. Jump and push walls. Those are really simple ideas on the wall where there's handprints, either up high or down at the children's level. If they're at the children's level, it's the place where they can be pushing themselves off the wall. So children who tend to be a little pushy sometimes can often be directed to a push wall where they can do the pushing that they need to do, but they're pushing themselves, not anybody else. And the jump walls where the handprints are up higher and children have to leap up and gradually see if they can get higher and higher with their jumping. Takes no room in the classroom, simple to operate, and very easy for kids who need that kind of diversion. It's also a place where we're finding a drum is a good place to be put. Again, with some children, we're noticing, particularly those diagnosed with ADHD or suspected of, we're also finding it with some children with autism, that just being able to go into a corner with a drum and match their heartbeats or find the rhythm that is their rhythm for today. It also provides an opportunity for children who have a little bit more energy and tend to be the ones to hit or to snatch. If they can go over into a corner and just pound on a drum for 5 minutes. It's noisy, it may drive you crazy, but it's a lot better than trying to control the behavior of some children who are simply not able to control it themselves. So something like a drum or just this activity corner that allows them to do what they need to be doing. And then they can come back and focus and engage with other children again. And then the individual activities, as we've mentioned, ways of moving from one area to another that allow them to jump, to hop. So you can see this little bridge, just an interesting pathway that's interesting to move from one place to another. So essentially then, what we're looking at for indoor is, what does the classroom look like? What does your space look like? What are the materials and equipment that encourage movement, that are easy to put into a classroom, that don't take a lot of space, but give the children some freedom to move as and when they need to? And then thinking about the activities that you would do, full group activities for all children together, small group for those who need to go over and find that space to be able to regulate themselves, to get rid of a little bit of extra energy, and then just using the individual pathways, ways of moving from one area to another, the way we move through transition. We're finding that those seem to be the easiest way to create a physically literate indoor space. And so none of this is requiring a lot of extra equipment. It can be, the mats and tunnels and balls, they're around, but things like the painter's tape, things like dancing, yoga, Simon says, transitions from one space to another, pretty simple to put in place.
Dawn, can I just add a couple of things there?
Yes.
I think it's often when we see the ideal, and then we have that reaction of, well, we can't have that. And
right.
So I think it's really important that people, instead of thinking, we can't do that because we're not allowed to have this, to think, what can we do? Like,
exactly.
Put your head in that space of what can we do? And then the other point, I visited it's kindergarten registration time in February in Chatham, or in Lambton, our board. And so I visited a couple of kindergarten registrations yesterday, and they had, and I've seen this before, they had floor prints, like feet prints of animals heading towards the Learning Commons where the registration was taking place. And no one even, like what I watched was that no one even had to prompt these little year-olds to jump from one to the next. They automatically do it. They see the footprints on the floor and they do it. And those, those are really simple ways to just add physical literacy right into your classroom. And the panels mentioned some very simple ways too, and so have you. So thank you for that.
And I think that that's a really important point. This is not talking about expensive equipment or taking a lot of room. It's just thinking with a slightly different mindset, because we tend to think that physical literacy is outside or it's in the gym. It's not in the classroom. That the classroom is a place to sit down and learn. Whereas 4 and 5-year-olds learn through play, and the more active that play is, the better they learn. So how do we change that, our conception of what the indoors looks like in very simple ways?
Yes, and we have in the chat, somebody has added that sheets and towels to create forts like we used to.
Oh, yes, what a great idea.
And houses out of tables and chairs. So yeah, those are really simple ways, right, to bring it in to your classroom. Thank you for sharing that.
Any other thoughts from anybody?
I think it's making it not as easy for them in the classroom. So stop putting everything next to where they're going to go. As simple as our sign. Right now we're using sticks with their names on them to answer the yes/no question of the morning. And instead of putting them where the buckets are, I've moved them across the room, which they have to go get them, but it also stops the traffic jam that happens at that table. That's a good idea.
Fantastic, yes. And actually that is a Montessori idea. In the Montessori programs, they will have the blocks stored on shelves at one side of the room, but the children are only allowed to build them on the other side of the room. So they have to keep going back and forth to get those blocks. And then I think if you're free enough within your room to say, well, the blocks can come from here, and yes, you can go and get the cars and trucks from over here, and you can use the Lego to build over here. And so the children are moving around. They have to actually get up and move.
And they can do it. You have to have faith that they can lift those big blocks. Even the little 3-year-olds, you watch them struggle, but they can get it up on the shelf and they can figure out how to ask a friend or.
Oh, and to me, that idea of the image of the child as being competent and capable. And then I always like to add curious. I don't know what the image of the child is in your kindergarten document, but certainly thinking of, yes, your 3-year-olds can do this. And if they can't do it by themselves, they'll ask a friend. And what great problem solving. We just need to accept that our children are indeed capable and competent, and give them a chance to show us that.
We are in a unique situation where we have JK and SK together, and it's fantastic for that. They can help with zippers. They can help with lunch containers.
They're models.
They are great models.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a huge piece. I think as we've isolated children into same age groups as they go through school, and maybe not as many opportunities, except when they're outside, to get together, for the older ones to learn how to be mentors and models, and the younger ones to learn from the older ones. Those things are perfect opportunities. And that's where maybe coming together in the hallway for activities is great, in the gym.
Some kids just aren't there yet either. They're just not mature enough. I notice with my own kids being in split classes. One of them, she tends to be friends with the younger ones. That's okay.
And that's okay, because that's what she wants to do. Is
maybe she's bossy. I don't know. That could be it too.
Maybe she's what? Sorry?
Bossy.
No. She's a leader.
Right. There we go. That's nice.
Cognitive reframing. She's the leader. I have a daughter like that. Yes. Any other comments coming up on the importance of the indoor space? And it is a new field. It's not something that there's a lot out there to read or look at. And so I really appreciate this discussion.
We just had one more, and it was basically thanking. So loving the idea of individual movement in the classroom, different ways to move during transitions, making movement necessary as part of the routine.
Yes, yes.
Can you do it like, which I would think probably you would put whatever you wanted to put in there, and implement in through sort of the third teacher. Great ideas from everyone. So
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you for that.
It seems like sometimes to wrap your mind around it, it seems more complex, but it's not. And I think that we've just gotten used to, when you're inside, you sit still and you sit
Right.
I mean, even growing up, my mom would say, that's an outdoor activity. So I think if you wrap your mind around it, you can be a lot more open to different ideas. As simple as putting the handprints up on the side of the wall that you wouldn't commonly think of, but it's simplistic. And just opening your mind to it being okay to be physically active in the classroom or a bit busier, more movement.
Yeah, I loved your idea, Dawn, about putting the handprints up higher, because all I could think about was how many times over a lot of years in schools, I've told kids not to jump up at door frames.
Door frames.
Oh, right.
And so I'm like, here we are, like, let's promote it, right? Put it on the wall up high and say, could you get that high, and see if they can do it? Like, it's just a different, frame of mind sort of thinking about it. But yeah.
I think that's a really good point, Marilyn. If we think about, when are we saying, no, don't do that, stop? Like, what are the things that we end up saying no to a lot? Is there a way that we can provide that activity so that we don't have to say no anymore?
Yes. Yeah.
And is there always a reason to saying no? Is that getting
right? Or does it just mean we have to turn our mindset around? Why can't they jump? What's wrong with that? We've just always said no. Why can't they? That's, exactly. And then I think your life in the room with children becomes so much less of managing of behaviors. You're not saying no. You're saying, let's do it, or okay, or here's where you do it. Just, it's that reframing of what we think the indoor space should be.
And then you're saying no less, so they listen more.
Opens the conversation more too, I guess. Like, how do you think you could jump that high, as opposed to saying, why are you jumping? Get down.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So it can be a really simple way. And as I say, it's still, I can't find a lot of stuff online, like videos to show you of what this would look like, but you're all coming up with brilliant ideas. Like, it's there, it's simple. It's just a
After our session, I found that video of those people that were turning tables upside down and made this whole obstacle course and trying to walk on a table sideways and crawling under chairs. And
oh, really?
The gym. It's fun.
Absolutely. And I think the simple idea of building the forts will start to lead to some of those ideas as well, just through simple sheets. There was a picture I saw, the educator had brought a couple of sheets into the room, and the children, one of them sit on the end of the sheet and the other one was pulling them around the room.
Mm-hmm. My grandchildren do that in our basement. Yeah, they just want a blanket, and then they get on the blanket, and the older one is he's a bit stronger, and there's some younger girls, and so they pile in and he drags them around, and they have great fun doing that. I worry the whole time that they're going to bang heads against each other, but they don't, and they manage, and they have a blast with just a blanket, right? That's all it takes.
Simple.
So.
And again, that opens, as you say, the conversation. So if you want to play that way, how do we ensure that you don't knock somebody over who's walking by? How do we ensure that you don't bump into somebody? What does it mean to keep yourself safe? And to think about that. And children, as we saw in the Loose Parts Play video on Tuesday, will begin to manage their own risk. They don't want to get hurt. So how do we support that conversation?
We have another comment from King George and Sarnia. I like to sing action songs with our students during wait times. So, for example, going over the sea, head and shoulders, toe, knee, chestnut.
Oh, I love that.
Oh, yes. I haven't done Tony Chestnut for ages. I'd forgotten about that one.
I know that song.
Dawn,
so.
we don't know it. Could you sing it to us?
No.
Scarlett's singing it. She knows it. So.
And again, those are great. Another idea that I've heard that was fabulous is going on a bear hunt. And there are so many books with going on a bear hunt that include all different kinds of movements. We had a center up in Fort McMurray, so cold, very cold, lots of snow. And one day, all of the children were just going crazy because they hadn't been out for so long. So they converted the entire center into a giant bear hunt. And children were bear hunting through the hallways, through different classrooms, up and down the stairs. They put a giant teddy bear in one of the washrooms and turned the lights off and just put a light on top of it. And the whole afternoon, everybody went on a bear hunt. And then they came back and they created artworks at their different age-appropriate levels using foam paint and glitter and twigs and leaves, and created the journey of their bear hunt. So there's your literacy piece, beginning, middle, and end of a story, created the art piece of the journey of their bear hunt.
Like as a group?
As a group. Well, they created individual pictures. With the younger children, it was a group picture that contributed to the group picture, but the older children did individual pictures. And art materials varied on the age of the children. So,
Cool.
all right, as usual, watching the time here. So I wanted to finish, we've already seen that. Wanted to finish with what are we learning from our physical literacy study. So we're only beginning to pull the evidence, because remember I said one of our objectives was to gather an evidence around the benefits to children. So here's what we're finding from the study. When children have increased opportunities for physical literacy leading to more physical activity, cognitively, and this was mentioned right off the bat this morning, when children are more active, they're more able to focus and pay attention. They're less distracted. We're finding in play, they have increased persistence on tasks. So when children are outside with loose parts, they will persist in building that fort or that bridge or whatever it is that they're doing with their loose parts. And we're finding that persistence on task is coming back into the classroom. Children are then more willing to persist to solve a problem inside the classroom. The loose parts video on Tuesday talked about this divergent thinking and problem solving. We're absolutely seeing that, both in terms of the active play, and then when they're moving back into their more quiet activities, they're transferring these skills that they're using in active play into the learning environment. So we're seeing more divergent thinking. Well, maybe there's another way to solve that problem. Maybe if we do this instead. So the problem solving and their increased ability to plan and carry out tasks. So all of those things come together into what early brain development calls the executive function skills, which happen in the prefrontal cortex. And these are the soft skills that enable children to be successful in school. If they can do those things, they will be more successful in school, more successful in their careers, and more successful in their relationships. And we can start with active play right now with that. So physically, obviously, they're developing more skills, but what does that mean? So with their better balance, as we talked about on Tuesday, they're more able to sit in chairs and to sit upright in circle with their in the tailor pose or with their legs crossed, however you do it. The biggest thing we're finding is that they're more able to dress in winter clothes independently. If they've got good balance, they can put on their snow pants and put on their boots and do their zippers up. They're more confident in their locomotion. And we see lots of children these days who are relatively clumsy, who can't maneuver through a busy hallway or maneuver through a classroom without bumping into other people or things. And so we're finding with the more focus on the physical literacy skills that their locomotion is becoming more confident. They've got more control over their body as they're maneuvering in crowded areas. The increased coordination, hand-eye and foot-eye coordination, is leading to improved small motor coordination. So we're hearing that children are more able to use scissors and cut on the line successfully, that they're able to move from a fist grip to a pincer grip to hold their pencils correctly, that their coloring is becoming more controlled. They're able to color within the lines, etc. So the focus on the large movement skills seems to be transferring to some of the small motor skills that we're concerned about in a classroom. Socially, we're finding huge improvements in cooperative play. Even toddlers who are in the parallel play stages of development are beginning to move more quickly into cooperative play. Play is more imaginative. And we have also found the creative play that came up in the Loose Parts video we watched on Tuesday, where one of the researchers was saying while children's IQ is increasing, their creativity is decreasing. And so we have found in our study that there's more imaginative play and more creativity. And that relates, of course, to problem solving. If you can be more creative, of course you can problem solve. We're finding children are more able to make and keep friends. And this has come through from some of our study centers who have children on the autism spectrum, where they would be very isolated, that engaging in more active play, becoming more physically literate, is allowing them to make friends. And one study participant reported that a child who has been diagnosed on the spectrum now has a friend who he can manage to engage with for about an hour a day. And for him, that's a huge improvement because he wouldn't engage at all during the day. So physical literacy is supporting that ability to interact, to communicate, and to make and keep friends. We're finding an improved ability to share and work together on projects, something that I wish my university students had learned how to do. So it's something that appears to be able to move forward into what we consider the academic realm. Emotional is probably where we're seeing the most and where our participants are most excited, because we're beginning to see better emotional self-regulation. Children who simply, you watch it building and building and building. Physical literacy is providing an outlet for these children so they can better regulate their emotions. We had a story of a study participant with a little boy during the intense cold spell last year where he was not able, he had lost control both during the day and at home with families. And they gave him a soccer ball. And she was saying the process of thinking about getting ready, aiming where he wanted the soccer ball to go, and kicking seemed to slow down his busy brain. And it seemed to give him time to think a little bit. So providing the processes that require the movement of the body seem to help in emotional self-regulation. The better inhibitory control, the less impulsive behavior, the reaching out and snatching, the calling out, the jumping up, those inhibitory behaviors that we see when children are together in a small space, that seems to be improving. We're finding calmer transitions. So I imagine all of you can think of a little one in your room who just doesn't handle transitions well. You give the warnings, 5 minutes, and then it'll be time for lunch or whatever. And there's still children who really struggle making those transitions. They want to go to the next one, the next activity. Maybe the activity might be, we're going to go outside. You need to clean up so we can go outside. And we know that little one wants to go outside, but that transition process is what's so difficult. And we're finding calmer transitions when children have opportunity to be physically literate and active. So generally, the biggest thing we're finding is that there's the improved overall behavior. And we're hearing our study participants saying, I'm spending less time managing behavior than I ever did before. And if you think of how many minutes, hours a day you spend managing behavior. If we can reduce that, that makes a huge difference. So my final slide is the concerns that we've heard as we've been traveling across the country with this is that too many children are displaying short attention spans. The EDIs are showing delayed communication and interaction skills all across the country. We're hearing about poor emotional self-regulation and challenging behaviors in the classroom. And our study participants are telling us that when they enhance physical literacy opportunities and increase physical activity, they're now finding less management of behaviors. They are more, they're enjoying the learning activities because they can plan something and it's actually what they hoped would happen at the end of it. That everybody, the atmosphere inside is more calm and productive. And that they're building stronger relationships with every single child in their program. Those are huge benefits. And this comes from things that can be very simple, as we've talked about in the last 2 days. And that's all I have to say. I just wonder now if you've got some questions or some comments. Are we getting anything on the chat room, Mary Lynn?
Not yet. We'll see if anybody has anything to write.
I'd be curious if anybody's find like the story, first of all, with the teacher who didn't want to take the children outside, the teaching partner, and now is convinced that that's a good thing to do. Are you finding some of those things that I've listed here?
Oh yeah, definitely.
I have the risky play teacher who I've just convinced this year to take all of them outside for the first chunk of our day. We used to split and whoever wanted to come out could come out with me and she would stay in, and now we all go out this year. She's let go of the fact that they're going to get hurt because they haven't yet gotten hurt.
And what's convinced her to go outside and take all the children with her?
I think she's just seen it over the years of how they come back in. The ones that have been out come in and participate differently than the ones who didn't make it out at all.
Ah, so she ran her own control group study.
Pretty much. Yeah.
That's awesome.
By accident, maybe,
Yeah.
but it happened, yes.
But that's okay. But that's when the proof is really clear, isn't it? It's not just, oh, this group of children is different from last year's children. No. And you know, we do have a lot of children where we have to encourage them to go outside initially because they don't get enough outside time at home. They are already starting to become couch potatoes.
Dawn, could you put the resource page back up? We had a comment that was asking for that.
Certainly.
We also have Byron Hodgson from Dresden. I'm assuming he's with other people, but exclaims that you are so knowledgeable, Dawn. Thank you.
Oh, that's very kind. That's very kind. So I didn't put the resources page up from webinar number 1, and I'm sorry it was much longer than this one. I put all the video links and whatnot. We didn't get to it on Tuesday morning. And early years physical literacy is my team's website. That's where our materials and whatnot are. So Active for Life is keeping track of the results of the study because they're one of our funders. So they have 2 websites, just their general activeforlife.com, and then there's the /ECE one, and that's where we're posting as they come in our highlight stories from our participants. We'll be posting all the results of the study as we're finishing. You're actually the first group to hear some of the results of the study because we're only just in that process right now of analyzing the qualitative data.
Yeah, and I just want to add for those asking for the resources, so if you've taken a picture of it, great, but if you're trying to scribble it all down, just remember that this will all be up on our blog, the elementary program blog. So everything that we do is posted there, and that is completely an open site for everyone to grab things from. So you're more than welcome to go back in, have a look at slides, listen to Dawn talk and our panel for anyone that missed it as well. So that's always there too. LKDSB let's see if I can do it off the top of my head, LKELEM Pro, P-R-O, at blogspot.com. Lots of great resources on that site, just saying.
Yeah. And Mary, and even though I really tried hard to give extra time for comments at the end, we're just about there. Did you have some slides that you needed to finish off, the evaluation slide and whatnot?
Yes, we do. So we can head there now, Rod. Yep, I will post it there.
Was Ben able to get that website up? I know on Tuesday it wasn't working.
Which website?
This one.
Oh,
The
yes.
website,
Yeah,
the tiny URL. It's working.
Ben can always fix everything. So I just had somebody ask me if I could say my our blog spot again. So I put that in the chat room for anyone who is curious about it. So there it is there. Rod will get this. Today's probably to, I don't know how that works, but to Ben, and then it goes on the blog spot very shortly. So if you want to pipe in there, Rod?
Yeah, I'll get the recording to Ben later this afternoon, and he'll share it with everybody on the blog.
Yeah, so it won't be there right away, but it will be there by tomorrow. So, so feedback, we got some great feedback on Tuesday. If you have any feedback, tinyurl.com/2020 PL2, so it's physical literacy 2. So if you could do that for us, that would be great. We're always endeavoring to get better at everything that we do, so we love to hear the feedback. One of the feedbacks we've heard is shorter sessions. We know it's hard to sit and listen for an hour and a half, so we had the same comment made when we did some principal workshops last week as well, that were an hour and a half long. We got the same comment, so Ben and I are taking that into consideration for anything we do in the future. And I didn't really introduce Dawne today, so I want to thank you, Dr. Dawne Clark from Alberta. Thank you for being here with us, Dawne, and sharing your wealth of information about physical literacy and young children's brains and bodies and how that all works. Sometimes, probably some of you, because it does for me, hit the guilt button hits. Today you mentioned children at a certain age not being able to sit down, and I have three very busy, the three oldest grandchildren, I have 6, and the 3 oldest are very busy, and very busy. Busiest children I've ever encountered, actually, in my brain, and at least in family. So I'll say that. So they are very busy, and one of them never sat down for dinner, and it just drove me and her grandfather crazy all the time. And now I'm feeling guilty about all the times that we were sit down with her, because she obviously couldn't, because she just would sit and then she'd spring. But it was partly danger too, right? Because she was up on her feet, and it was, anyway, some wild times when she was little. But she sits now and eats. She's 5, so she it's better now. Anyway, we're getting lots of thank yous from people, Dawne, but no real questions. I also want to thank my panel of experts here for volunteering, and it's hard sometimes to sit with your peers and put yourself out there and talk about the things that you do in your classroom. So thank you, Jocelyn, Scarlett, and Tracy, for doing that with us. And a big thanks to Rod in the background, because we couldn't do it without your Rod. So we're so appreciative of all you do to help us with these Zoom sessions. And you're getting very educated through the LKDSB this year, I know.
I am learning so much, I have to say.
Oh, you talked about the math you've learned, so now we're doing physical literacy. So yeah. So thanks everybody for spending your time with us this morning. We really appreciate it, and don't forget that you will be able to access this on our blog spot. So thanks again.